is our duty to fight for our freedom.
Joining us on our Sunday edition of the Fred Hampton Leftists. My name is JB Font, also known as James. I am here with Chris Richards. He's also known as the Eclectic Radical on Twitter. And we are just going to have a great conversation. If last time I checked, our conversation is going to be venturing on the drug war and how it started, some of the history about it. First off, Mr. Richards, how are you doing today?
So I'm doing okay. Like I said, the 3-day weekend. I'm enjoying my days off. I'm a little annoyed at the way a lot of people don't seem to care about some of the things that are still happening. Like, marijuana is not going to be legalized anytime soon. It doesn't appear.
Yeah. Fortunately, we just got the news here for anybody who's listening later at a later date is, April 3rd. So a couple of days ago, New York, Governor Cuomo signed the bill to legalize, marijuana in New York. I mean, that's something, but, for the most part, we still have it as a federal offense, and you still have nonviolent drug offenders that are still imprisoned, for, either in possession of or selling marijuana, which to me is the dumbest thing. And it keeps reminding me how far back in the past that Washington is when it comes to these different policies. And so it's pretty anger inducing when you think about it, because there's a lot of people who are still suffering and really needlessly, for the most part.
Well, and it's really kind of gross when you think about it, that someone would even, because they do this everywhere, someone would even pass a bill that decriminalizes or legalizes marijuana without voiding all the convictions of people who are already in prison for marijuana charges. It's just, why are we keeping people in prison for something we're legalizing now? We're saying there's nothing wrong with it. Are we like Kamala Harris? We just want to keep people in prison for their labor? Are we like Richard Nixon, where we just want to keep certain drugs illegal because we want to go after people who look like me and people who look like you?
Or do they want to keep them illegal so that the CIA can make money off the drugs and fund different types of interventions in other countries to create shadow governments so that we can create, a capitalist oligarchy?
I'm glad you mentioned the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
Because the money's a huge part of it, and I didn't want to mention the CIA first. But it's definitely worth noting that the CIA is totally integral to a lot of this. Where are the drug cartels? Well, the first drug cartel was that Iron Triangle heroin cartel, which was in countries that we had recently been at war with in Indochina, and which we were no longer at war with. But it was really convenient to have drug cartels illegally moving drugs and money and guns, because that would make it easier for you to illegally move drugs and money and guns through these cartels if you were in good with them. So that's how it started. The CIA set up these drug cartels as contacts in the post-Vietnam War Southeast Asia. And that turns into contacts with gangsters in New York. There's a movie about that, American Gangster, with Denzel Washington, who were selling all this Southeast Asian heroin. He was selling this stuff. It was coming back on the bodies of soldiers in coffins. So how do you think some gangster in New York City makes that happen? I mean, think about that for a moment. How does a gangster in New York City get the pull to bring drugs into the country in the coffins of dead soldiers?
There is a lot of fishy stuff going on with between these cartels and the government, the United States government, and that if that doesn't piss you off, especially if you were a black person growing up during the crack epidemic, and a lot of these things that were happening uh, in the 70s, where you had a lot of heroin use in different communities, then you're not paying attention.
No, and really that's the way it works, because where were they selling that? Where were they selling that heroin? They were selling it to black gangsters in Harlem, who were selling it right there in Harlem to the black community.
Hmm.
So this is the CIA choosing to sell drugs to vulnerable people who are already oppressed in various ways in the United States, for the specific reason of exploiting more vulnerable people overseas. So you've got both ends of imperialism at the same time, where you have white supremacy at home
Hmm.
and imperialism abroad, and it's the same people acting as the middleman between the two.
Yeah, it's crazy because we are propagandized so much to think that, oh, it's the government had nothing to do with it. It's just you just got bad people in the world who just want to profit, and one person never stops to think, well, what if those bad people were the people who got elected, or they employed people to work in different government agencies, and they're now pushing this to influence uh, the retention of power around the world. And so a lot of people aren't thinking about that, but a lot of people are waking up. And thankfully, because there's a lot of these documents that have been coming out that have been released, that we're now learning that, the United States government did some things that really put us in such a cultural and economic bind, to the point where we're feeling the effects of it decades later.
And you can almost say that's on purpose too,
Hmm.
because how many people, to escape poverty, they join that military that's financed by selling the drugs in their neighborhood, and go on to do the things overseas that were done to them at home as part of that cycle. And that's why you can see Congress people saying things like, well, we have to support the military because the military has supported black people and helped lift them out of poverty.
So,
Which they did by taking away their other choices, by removing the social safety nets that had helped black people climb out of poverty before.
yeah, it's kind of hard to, it's kind of hard to get out of poverty, you know, when your choices are only limited to going into an institution where you may or may not lose your life.
And more importantly, where you will probably have to do inhumane things to other people in the service of the people who have been oppressing you. So it's double-edged victimization. The government victimizes the citizen. Then the government puts the citizen in the military to victimize the foreigner who's being invaded.
Yeah. But there's even a triple edged sword. I'm going to one up you on this one. But now you have some of these people who have been victimized in other countries that now have no other place to go because of what we did to their country. And now they're coming here, but now we're treating them like animals and putting them in cages.
Well, and this all ties together with the history of the drug war again. So it
Hmm.
starts with that drug cartel in Southeast Asia, right?
Yes.
So Nixon was the one who started the war on drugs.
Yeah.
And what Nixon banned was heroin, and well, he stepped up enforcement of heroin, which was already restricted, but which he banned more seriously, marijuana, and LSD. Now, marijuana was associated strongly with, like I said before, people who look like you and people who look like me during the 1960s and early 1970s.
Hmm.
You had these drugs that were made illegal in order to target specific populations. Marijuana to target both of us, heroin to target you, LSD to target me.
Mm-hmm.
And this was done specifically to go after these organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I remember my history correctly, there was targeting, like you said, for different drugs for different racial or ethnic groups.
And protest groups. So the LSD and pot were strongly associated with the hippie peace movement.
Mm-hmm.
And pot was strongly associated with the Black Power movement.
Mm-hmm.
And because of sort of weird ties and connections through connections, those movements were sort of connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so all this stuff was tied together. And then by targeting drugs associated with outgroups, it allows you to target the outgroups.
Yeah. But it's really just a roundabout way of trying to bring back, in a sense, slavery back into the United States without having to be so overt about it.
Well, yes.
It's interesting because I showed my nieces and nephews this, and they were absolutely floored. They're teenagers, and I read to them the 13th Amendment, and the second part of it that says that except those who are, in prison, it gives the allowance of them being subject to slavery. And, two of my oldest nieces and nephew, they have been through civics class. And so their jaws were on the floor. And so this really, for anybody who's watching, Google the 13th Amendment and read it in its entirety. And it will show that the United States still allows slavery just for ones who have been put in prison. And so, it shows that the original sin of slavery is still going on.
And the drug war is one of the ways that it's been perpetuated. I mean, there are more people in prison for drug offenses than almost anything else, violent or nonviolent.
Yes.
It's drug offenders.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of murderers in prison are somehow connected or were at one point to the drug business. And all of this is because of both prohibition and because of criminal networks that have been set up in order to profit from prohibition and exploit prohibition for the illegal access it gives to other countries.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the crack epidemic.
Yeah.
Well, where does cocaine come from? Cocaine comes from South America, Mexico, places like that. So you set up a cartel in Colombia, and now you have drug smuggling between Colombia and Mexico and the United States. And now you have reasons for people to be moving back and forth between countries like Nicaragua and El Salvador and Panama. And this goes into the next phase in the 80s, where we're trying to support the Contras without anyone knowing we're doing it.
Mm.
And where was that cocaine sold? That was the 80s crack epidemic in New York and Los Angeles, and the 80s cocaine epidemic in Miami.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's wild, because how many people in this country have we lost to the proliferation of those drugs being, abused because of it flooding the neighborhood?
And how have they hidden that with propaganda? Because there's remember that Mario Van Peebles movie, New Jack City, that was supposed to be telling the true story of how crack started in New York? Where's the CIA agent in New Jack City?
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be the true story, but there's no CIA agent.
No. The only thing I remember from New Jack City was sit your $5 ass down before I make change. But that's the only part I remember.
To be fair, it's a really good gangster movie.
Yeah.
But where are the CIA agents in New Jack City? Where are the CIA agents in Scarface? Because we're talking about Miami and Cuba and the 70s and 80s drug trade.
Mm-hmm. It's got me thinking about the alcohol prohibition that we had. I think it was back in the 20s, if I'm correct.
20s.
Yeah. So the alcohol prohibition, didn't it last 12 years, something like that? I think. Was it 12 years?
The Volstead Act was passed in 1918 and came into effect in 1919. And FDR ended prohibition his first year in office in 1933.
You had this prohibition, which also started NASCAR. And so you had people who they were pissed off because they couldn't drink, Well,
that's the fun part. Prohibition was never a prohibition on consumption. There's nothing that stopped you from drinking. It was illegal to make more than a certain amount for more than specific purposes. It was illegal to make beer with more than a certain alcohol percentage. It was illegal to make wine with more than a certain alcohol percentage. That's where near beer and fake wine come from. Sparkling cider became a big thing because of prohibition.
Wow, okay.
Ginger ale became a big thing because of prohibition. Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper first became a thing because of prohibition.
And Coca-Cola originally had cocaine in it.
Coca-Cola is still the largest legal user of coca leaves in the world, though they no longer actually have the chemical that contains cocaine in them. They still use coca for flavor, but they are blanched coca leaves that have had all the potency drained out of them.
Oh, I did not know that. That is very interesting.
It was a big deal. The whole Coca-Cola is specific reference to cocaine and caffeine. Cocaine from the coca plant and caffeine.
Wow, that's pretty gnarly. I mean, and I think there was a video I was watching. It was talking about the history of certain hard drugs that were used in the United States. I think was it heroin that used to be sold over the counter? I think it was heroin.
So everything used to be sold over the counter at one point. So where where this all starts in a way is the Food and Drug Act when Teddy Roosevelt was president. Because before the Food and Drug Act, you had toothache drops for children. There was a product called laudanum, which was a solution of opium and alcohol that for a while was only that later was only available with a prescription after the Food and Drug Act, but which was commonly sold over the counter before the Food and Drug Act. Newspaper ads for laudanum advised drugging your wife in order to improve her attitude and make her happier. There were headache pills that advised drugging your kids to keep them from crying.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but I helped raise my nieces and nephews. Where was this drug? No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
that's kind of funny. I didn't mean to laugh, but it's just
for teething. We're talking about that tooth pain.
Oh yeah.
Anything for the teeth was always heroin because you could dissolve it in the mouth and it would absorb right into the tissues in the mouth.
It's interesting because there was this. It was considered an old remedy, by a lot of people. Like if you had a baby that was teething, you would take a little bit of bourbon and just rub it on their gums. And I thought that was extreme when I was younger, but heroin, like
give them heroin so they stop crying.
Yeah, but I also didn't realize that morphine is a type of heroin. So we still give heroin today, but it's in hospitals.
Morphine is a pure source drug from which heroin is then cut, basically. You cut morphine with something else, and when you cut it enough, you get heroin. But morphine is the pure drug, yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, that makes sense. So when they tried giving me morphine for pain that one time, I was actually getting the purest form. Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, there are so many stories because I was born in New Jersey and I lived in Camden County, New Jersey, when I was little. And this was in the 1980s during the crack epidemic, so it was really bad. Crime was really bad. And so one of the reasons why I live here in Florida now is because my mom had to, pick us up and move because she didn't want to raise three boys in that type of environment. And it makes me think, what if we didn't have that epidemic in the first place? Where would I be,
Well, how would life be different for a lot of people? There'd be fewer people in prison.
That's for sure. Yeah.
And there would have been fewer shenanigans of certain sorts in certain parts of the world that got people in trouble.
Yeah. And really, it was the drug war really was part and parcel because of imperialism. So if we were to halt the drug war, we would, in a sense, affect imperialism in a positive way where we would essentially slow it down at least.
Oh, definitely. Let me give you another example.
Sure.
So we know that one of the famous products from Afghanistan is, again, the poppy that they get opium from.
Yes.
Now, we all know about the Sackler family and Purdue, and then you've got tie-ins with Bayer, who's the biggest legal opium farmer in the world. They have huge opium poppy fields in Tasmania.
Wow.
Now, Afghanistan, most of the cultivation of poppies is what you would call shadow market.
Yeah.
It's been controlled, whether by the Taliban or us or the Afghan government. Imagine if there were legal competition for Bayer in Afghanistan
Ooh.
instead of a government that completely kept it illegal for drug war purposes.
Ooh. Now see, now you got the hamster running in the wheel in my head. What if Afghanistan did what Evo Morales tried to do with the lithium in Bolivia?
Funny that you mentioned that. There are large amounts of lithium and gold in Afghanistan too.
That's why we're still there.
Lithium, gold, and opium. All three of those things.
Yeah.
Plus, it's on what they call the Silk Road.
I remember that from history class. Yeah.
The Silk Road is the old trade route overland from Turkey to China.
Yeah.
It goes through Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq. It's how you connect China to the Mediterranean.
Got it.
So the places that we've been involved in these wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, all of these places are on that same Silk Road.
That makes sense.
So you're trying to control access to China overland without having to go through, what's that big country between the Ukraine and China if you're going overland through the north?
Yeah. I like to call it Putinville.
That works too. But that's the route that you have to control if you want to bypass Russia in any sort of business with China.
Yeah, because the United States doesn't want to mess with Russia because they are still, in a sense, a superpower.
Well, China and the U.S. are the superpowers, and Russia is sort of trying to play them off against each other.
Mm.
But the U.S., in its policy, is also trying to play Russia and China off against each other.
Mm.
And all of this drug stuff now in the Middle East happens in that same part of the world where we have all these regime change operations going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have this whole classic smuggling network for opium from Afghanistan to Turkey on that Silk Road. So if the U.S., if you've got all that drug activity in areas where the U.S. has been doing regime change stuff and covert operations, that benefits people who are trying to move people and guns and money through those countries.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
But it always ties in that way. All of these cartels are always in places where the CIA wants to move stuff around.
Yeah. And they usually have a government that makes it seem like they fight against it, but they don't really. Or
Well,
go ahead.
that's the trouble. Is it's always we're here to defend democracy and the American way.
Yeah.
So how are we defending democracy in the American way when we're supporting all these dictators? I mean, remember in Vietnam, we avoided an election.
Mm-hmm.
In Vietnam, we avoided an election and put our guy in charge with no election because we were scared that we knew that the communists would win an election. We did the same thing in Korea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we like dictators if those dictators are going to be there for us.
Mm-hmm.
We're not interested in democracy in any sort of real foreign policy sense. We want people who will bend the knee to us. And democratic countries might be told by their people not to bend the knee to us.
Yeah. It's just like with in Bolivia, they propped up Áñez, to be the puppet ruler for Bolivia until the people said no, she has to go. Um, and so she went. So,
And now Joe Biden is trying to protect her from criminal charges for taking over the country and having people terrorized and killed in the streets.
it makes me think about all the policies that Joe Biden probably had his hand in the 1980s that also pushed this imperialism through the drug war in other countries as well. Because he was very much in government, in the 80s, when the CIA, I think, if I'm correct, was it the CIA being ran by George H.W. Bush? Or
George
running,
H.W.
was he running,
Bush ran
or
the
was he?
CIA under Gerald Ford, and
Oh, okay,
Bush's
never mind.
job was to come in and clean the CIA up after all the scandals that had come out in the church. But of course, he wasn't actually cleaning anything up. He was just, covering it up. He was an old CIA guy himself.
Got it.
But yeah, they had all those Vietnam era scandals that led to the church hearings and things like the drug involvement, how the CIA was dealing drugs and how the CIA was paying terrorists to kill people who were pro-communist in South Vietnam, all the while claiming that the Viet Cong were the terrorists.
Wow. Where really the Viet Cong were just people who were trying to protect their country.
Well, they were people who were trying to fight for their country, and they were doing violent things in the name of trying to take their country back.
Yeah.
But they weren't terrorizing. It was the United States that was terrorizing populations.
Yeah.
It was the United States that was forcing people into what they called strategic hamlets, really concentration camps.
Speaking of which, wasn't it Adolf Hitler that said that he learned about concentration camps from the United States originally?
Well, the United States had these prisons for forced labor all over the South, chain gangs, where, prisoners were rented out to do work in factories and plantations. Hard work, too. Backbreaking stuff, unhealthy stuff. People died.
Yeah.
And that was where he got the same idea, those southern chain gangs and indigenous reservations.
Yeah. And so it seems like we continued it in Vietnam.
And we continued in Vietnam. It just grows. And it ties into the drug war. It's the same stuff. We wanted to control those populations and make them do our will.
I think it was a comedian, that Eddie Griffin, who said, this is supposed to be the United States of America, not the United Empire of Earth.
Well, I mean, how far back do you want to critique the United States of America? I mean, the 1619 Project has done it on race. How far back you want to critique the United States on capitalism with race tied into it at the same time?
I mean, that goes all the way back to before, the United States was ever formed, and, when you had the colonies. I mean,
it goes back before the colonies. It goes back to the Spanish colonies. Columbus and Cortez had to borrow money for their expeditions. And there was this expectation that they would make money to pay off their investors.
Makes sense.
the destruction of Mexico under Cortez was so horrible because Cortez had to pay off his debts. And despite stealing from his own men and not paying them their share, he still ended up having to go on one harebrained adventure after another and commit ever worse atrocities because he had to pay the debts off for that first Mexico expedition, even though he took this huge treasure and stole his men's share. His creditors ended up collecting it all.
Wow. Whew. So
And what's that? That's financial capitalism. We're earning you money for the plunder. It's no pray, no pay. And that's our modern capitalism now. No pray, no pay. The bank loans you money, and you go out and you use that money to steal from someone else.
yeah, rob Peter to pay Paul, as the old adage goes.
And as ironic as it seems, because all these criminal enterprises have their origins in these nefarious CIA and imperialist plots.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, drugs put all this money in neighborhoods that wouldn't have that money otherwise.
What do you mean?
One of the reasons that any sort of prohibition is so insidious is it doesn't matter whether it's booze or drugs or sex work.
Yeah.
If there's a business in a neighborhood associated with whatever that forbidden activity is,
Mm-hmm.
if it is locally controlled, which of course makes a big difference in a lot of places, but if it is locally controlled, then that's money in the neighborhood. And that's money in the neighborhood that's circling in its own economy outside of official control. And so in this sort of ironic sense, only for the gangsters and the people who are making money from the gangsters, which is important to understand, it is liberating for some of the people involved because they are becoming the ruling class of their neighborhood through this imperialist exploitation project.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, they're really using capitalism to drive this. If it was workers owning the means of production, then it would be the entire neighborhood would be profiting off of this.
Well, so one of the things that the Morales government has done in Bolivia
Mm-hmm.
that the U.S. government really, really hated was unionized coca farmers.
Please continue.
So the Morales government was unionizing coca farmers, which directly impacts the drug cartel's bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, if I am growing more in favor of legalizing more drugs and them being regulated than just decriminalization. So then that would also mean people who work to produce these things may, they would have to be unionized. And so that's an interesting take. Unionizing coca farmers. Wow. Because I mean, I'm all for taking money away from the cartels, in a sense where if we're going to legalize it, then make it so that the people of the area can make money off of it, in a legal way and in a way where they collectively own the means of production and distribution.
That's always best whenever it's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, being able to construct these systems where people can support themselves and not be dependent on the boss, or in some cases a government you can't trust, is really important when you're trying to build a movement and organize a revolution that, you know, we know it's not ready to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. It makes me think about there was a proposal when Bernie Sanders was running in his policies where there, if I remember correctly, on his criminal justice policy was you free all nonviolent drug offenders, and you also give them training on how to operate a business and grants to start a business in the marijuana sales industry. And then he would
Yes.
legalize marijuana recreationally at the federal level.
And he was criticized for being against reparations, but he was the only candidate to have an actual drug war reparations policy.
Yeah. And that would have been gigantic because it would have kept, especially like different drug manufacturers and tobacco manufacturers from getting in on the business. So then you would have local people from those same communities that were harmed by the drug war. They will be able to actually sell marijuana, which they sold before, but they will be able to do it at the legal level and be able to make money off of it. And that money would actually circulate multiple times within that community and would serve that community better. Plus, it would also free a lot of them and expunge their records, which means that now instead of having a bunch of ex-cons, you now have a bunch of new business owners.
And that's exactly where legalization plans up to now have gone wrong.
Yeah.
Here in Oregon, we're legal. And the way it was passed here in Oregon, you could not have a criminal record to be involved in the legal pot business. So what did that mean? That means that any of the original growers who knew the business in the industry were automatically disqualified for having records for growing. That meant all the dispensaries that had any sort of trouble with the cops during the medical only or the private club era were disqualified or given a huge hassle when it came time to try to get their legal licenses. So the pioneers of the business were being locked out of their own market in order to let all these corporations come in and make that money instead. Now in Oregon, you're talking about all these white hippies and not black people in a neighborhood where they're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
But still, all the people who know anything about the industry are locked out, and a corporation is brought in instead.
Yeah.
If you're really a capitalist, how is that healthy in any industry?
No. I mean, that's not allowing the free market to work as intended.
That's deliberately putting constraints on the market, not to benefit the people who are supposed to be protected by regulations on the liberal market, but specifically to protect the corporations who we need to be protected from in the liberal market. Well, it's all part of the way that the government criminalizes people in order to control them.
Yeah, it's true.
Because if I give you a criminal record that affects the rest of your life, and I'm always able to track you through that criminal record, and I'm always able to find some reason if I want to put you back in prison or kill you because of that criminal record.
Yeah.
Now, police departments say these don't exist, but cops in most cities have what they call a zombie squad, whose job is to hound people who are out on parole in order to find a way to get them convicted for any sort of felony, not a parole violation, any sort of felony that would be a third strike to send them in prison for life, or any sort of opportunity to kill them, on the assumption that you want people who already have 2 violent crimes on their record to get that third strike or be killed. You want them removed from society. So this is something police departments have. They don't admit to it, but it exists. In Los Angeles, it's called the SIS, the Special Investigation Squad.
Sounds like a way to skirt around the law to get some more workers back in the slave camps.
Or to remove, or to kill people entirely in order to show your power. Now, keep in mind that the reason that organizations like this exist and the reason that 3 strike laws exist is because of the drug war.
Circle, full circle. Yeah. So we need to get rid of the drug war. We need to stop in the drug war. That's the only thing that could help this. But unfortunately, we have the father of the crime bill, that is the commander-in-chief in the Oval Office.
And what's hilarious is this is an issue where a lot of liberals and conservatives agree that it should just be legal. Barry Goldwater said that we should legalize everything, not just pot. Barry Goldwater said we should legalize everything in the 1980s. We could tax the heck out of it, and we could institute a negative income tax, which is this thing that rich people pretend to like, which pays poor people money instead of just telling them they can't pay taxes, and makes rich people pay a reasonably progressive tax. Conservatives never really like it, but it's something they pretend to like from time to time.
Wow. Okay.
And it's hilarious because the great advocates of the negative income tax are Milton Friedman, Barry Goldwater, and Martin Luther King Jr. So that's an odd combination.
That is a very odd combination. Milton Friedman.
Well,
wow.
Milton Friedman's idea was this was a better system than welfare. Just have a tax system that just straight up redistributed wealth. Now, by doing this, he wasn't actually advocating for it for real. He was trying to show how taxes work from a rich person's point of view in this very nakedly, we're taking it from you to give it to poor people sort of way. Because he knew that would be unpopular with rich people. So it's this thing within a thing. But Barry Goldwater and Martin Luther King Jr. were both apparently really serious about it. And Barry Goldwater believed you could replace most taxes with taxes on drugs.
But that's also when our military budget was significantly smaller too.
And this is the 1980s where we started to ramp up that military budget, and we started to crack down on drugs.
Yeah, I mean, because our military budget, grew, it exploded exponentially. I mean, just imagine
Reagan bragged about it. The military budget was the only thing he didn't cut, and he increased the military budget so much that it gobbled up all the other cuts. And Reagan's budget actually had a bigger deficit than Carter's budget from Carter's last year in office.
Wow. We have our military budget is bigger than the next 10 countries combined. And so even if we cut it just by in half.
And that's not even counting the money that they lost.
The money that they lost?
Yeah, Lee Camp talked about that a few years ago now, where the Pentagon failed an audit, and there's just $20 trillion that they spent that they couldn't
Oh,
account for how they spent it.
yeah, I remember that.
So we're not talking 1 trillion in 1 year's budget. We're talking $20 trillion that the Pentagon definitely spent, but in no way can account for how.
Not in 1 year, though, right?
No, but it just disappeared. And we don't know how much disappears every year. There's another scandal that's supposedly getting ready to come up, which is another huge amount of money that the Pentagon just lost and can't account for.
That's
Do
yeah.
you think that could be connected to corruption? And do you think that corruption could be any way connected to the United States being the biggest drug dealer in the world?
I'm always going to err on the side of saying yes on that one because given the United States history involving these types of things, I would say yeah, probably.
And so, I mean, this is really, if we want to call ourselves revolutionary, this is something to pay attention to, is the fact that this is one of the ways that a large number of people have their freedom completely taken away from them, under circumstances where it can almost always be taken away from them again in the future if somebody wants to badly enough.
Yeah. That's wild. We all because, of wanting to take a substance that either could relieve something we may use recreationally, and it kind of make
Alienation.
yeah,
I mean,
alienation.
because Marx calls religion the opiate of the masses. Well, it's nice to have actual opiates sometimes and not just religion, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, it makes me think about the whole opiate crisis we have in the United States, and how it's being taken so seriously, or is it really being taken? It seems like from a cultural aspect, it's being taken seriously, but
So, well,
from
well, it's always someone that they want to other, and by they I mean the media establishment. During the 80s, drug users were black crackheads. It was a stereotype.
yeah,
During the 60s, drug users were hairball hippies like me, or again, black inner city addicts. So it's targeting specific people who are stereotyped as drug users.
mhm,
And when you have people who are stereotyped as drug users, you're able to target that population. Now, remember, the Black Panthers got killed under a variety of pseudo-legal murders carried out by cops or informants on police or federal payroll.
mhm.
Wasn't there a movie about that recently?
Judas and the Black Messiah. I saw it recently, actually. Yeah.
In Los Angeles, the organization US, whose leaders were taking federal money to basically tell them what was going on in the underground revolutionary community and do psyops for them and COINTELPRO stuff.
Mm, okay.
So the federal government used a rival radical group to kill the Black Panthers in Los Angeles.
Wow.
That's sort of manipulation that you have to be aware of. And you have to look at what people are fighting for, because it is a situation where we know what the Panthers were fighting for:
Mhm.
liberation for everybody who was being oppressed by capitalism, starting with black people in their own neighborhoods.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other groups that joined the Rainbow Coalition, is the same thing: liberation for everyone
Mhm.
oppressed by capitalism, starting with the people that they were in solidarity with in their neighborhoods and branching outwards from there in a federation of all of us.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous.
For the capitalists, yes.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
very dangerous for the capitalists.
Yeah. I think they're starting to sense that danger again, especially with a lot of us. They're seeing now that a lot of us are now waking up to the tactics that they use. And so now they're trying to come up with a different strategy of how to either co-opt to destroy from the inside, or intimidate, use methods of intimidation to get us to stop educating the rest of the masses on what's really going on. I'll give you an example. There was a YouTuber by the name of Second Thought. You probably have heard of him. Makes very great videos. He's a socialist. And he made a video. I want to say it's about, I think it was about Black Lives Matter. It was one of those videos having to do with police brutality. Was it police brutality or something else? I forgot. But Homeland Security visited him and questioned him about his video. And so he's just a YouTuber, and he got questioned. And then you have, for instance, YouTube algorithms being in such a way where, they silence a lot of us on the left. You have, these campaigns that, and unfortunately, I've had some friends adopt the same viewpoint that the movement for Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. They try to equate, any type of left wing group, just like they did, in the McCarthy era, with, making us seem like we're terrorists when, how can you be a terrorist when you're trying to bring democracy into the workplace and make it so that workers actually have a say over what goes on in their workplace?
How are you going to do that without terrorizing capitalists somehow?
Touche.
I mean, we talk about stochastic terrorism like, bullying and fascism online, things like that. But it's also stochastic terrorism to, make people afraid to tell anyone the truth or do anything to resist by cracking down on their. So when we resist, when we fight back, the capitalists are afraid and they think that we're terrorizing them. Remember that the Viet Cong were the terrorists.
Yeah.
Nobody thought about whether the French were terrorists or the Americans were terrorists. The Viet Cong were the terrorists.
Yeah.
Nobody questioned whether the Palestinians or the Israelis are the terrorists on the West Bank. No one questions whether people on Wall Street or Black Lives Matter activists are terrorists. I mean, we're not calling Bill Gates and Betty DeVos terrorists because they've helped destroy the public school system.
And yet, they kind of are.
We're not calling the Sackler family terrorists because they exploited the legal side of the drug war.
We're not calling some politicians terrorists, even though they put in policies that either tanked, wealth, for many of us, or they put a lot of us in prison for nonviolent offenses.
From an Iranian point of view, how many U.S. politicians have sponsored terror in the Middle East?
Whew. From an Iranian point of view, from a Syrian point of view, from a Yemeni point of view, it's damn near all of them.
And there you go. And that's what you're looking at. You're looking at this system. I made a joke the other day where I said I thought the bipartisan Washington consensus should be between Trotskyists and anarchists. And I could live with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's not what we have.
No, not at all. Yeah. You know, it's like it just makes me think about a quote by Kyle Kalinske. He was quoting someone else, but he said, "When you vote for someone, you essentially indirectly own what they do."
And I have to take a moment to trash Kyle Kalinske then, because he just had shoe on head on his show the other day.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
since we're talking about stochastic terrorism,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not a good look.
no, it's not. And he went out of his way to platform her. I went to YouTube the other day to check my page, and when I went to the home page, it popped up secular talk. No, I'm sorry. It popped up the Kyle Kalinske and Shoe, and there's her picture right there. And it's like, okay, they're really selling this guest appearance, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. That's unfortunate, but
But hey, that's why he's got more paying subscribers than us, right?
possibly, who knows? But yeah, Oh, while I have you here, um, the name of your channel, as well as, and I think you also have a blog as well, if I'm correct.
I have a Patreon and I have a YouTube channel. I have not been blogging on my Patreon as much as I was,
Yeah.
but my YouTube channel and my Patreon are both Eclectic Radical,
Okay.
and I'm at Eclectic Radical on Twitter.
Okay. You know, I always enjoy these conversations. Number one, because I always learn more. But at the same time, it kind of, and it's not you that pisses me off. It's the information that pisses me off. It's like, I'm enlightened and then pissed off. It's like right now I'm reading The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kilton. And that is also doing the same thing. It's pissing me off, but enlightening me at the same time. And so I hope you continue to piss people off.
Well, it's really important that you be pissed off.
Yeah.
More than 70% of the country wants universal health care, but how much of the country wants universal health care enough to go on general strike for it?
I hope that happens soon. I just don't know if it will, but I want a general strike more than anything. Like, even more than electing somebody else, I want a general strike. Because to me, that means that if we get that general strike, then we're bypassing the elected officials and going to their corporate masters and making our demands from them.
No, and that's exactly the point. And
Yeah.
I don't have any power to make anything happen, but one of the things that's always interested me, well, what would we want to see from a general strike? So I have a list of what the new government should be like, but I need to start working on it again just for fun.
I would like to see that, actually. I would like to see like a comprehensive list, because, you know, what good is a general strike without demands, right?
Well, and then that's the thing, is it's not just enough for demands. It needs to be, okay, we're going to take the government over. And this is what the system is going to look like. And you're either on board or you're not, and we're not coming back to work until you are.
Yeah, yeah. But this also would take a huge undertaking of mutual aid to be started, uh, and also relied upon, loyally relied upon by people.
And that's really the trouble. People have to go out in their That's really the trouble. People have to go out in their neighborhoods and talk to their neighbors about a rent strike, or talk to their coworkers about a strike at work.
Yeah,
And that's the hard part.
yeah. Because unfortunately, a lot of people, they can't, they're under this fear that if they do that, then they will lose their home, or they'll lose income, and they won't be able to feed their families, or, many of the different things that we depend on our jobs for. So it's kind of a
And
catch 22, It's kind of
and
a,
that's why it's so hard, because you have to have people angry enough to feel like they have nothing to lose from doing this. Whether you want a guerrilla war or a general strike, it doesn't matter. You still have to have people. And if you don't have people who are willing to do that, then nothing's going to happen. Same with an election. If you want to really take over the Democratic Party, it's not enough to just talk about it.
I've said this many times. I don't want it to result in violence, but if I look at the history of the United States, and every single point where we actually had drastic change and a positive direction, it resulted in someone getting hurt.
You've got to expect from the experience of people who have been trying to do this before that at some point violence will be used against anyone trying to substantially change the system.
Yes, it's true.
I mean, you see that in the Black Lives Matter protests, where people who are just standing there were getting shot and beat up by cops.
Yeah, you're right. No.
So we can talk all we want about not wanting a violent revolution. I don't want a violent revolution. A civil war would be a horrible thing. Guerrilla warfare in the streets would be a horrible thing. Violence is going to be used against us whether we're violent or not, and we have to be prepared to take that risk, which is another thing that most people aren't ready for. Most people are not willing to get killed right now for universal health care.
I think it might be because we're at a point where people haven't totally had enough yet.
We're still, despite this huge death count, I mean, most people still aren't dying. Most people still feel like they have something that they can lose, that things can still get worse for them. People really have to feel like there's nothing that could make it worse and they have nothing left to lose. Or you have to organize people to have solidarity and really want to win.
And that's where it has to go, organizing. And people like you using your voice, people like me, we use our voices wherever possible to help influence those people out there to also organize. I can't do as much as many other people because being immunocompromised, but I can use my voice.
Well, what you guys are doing with Fred Hampton Left is really awesome, and we need more of that. We need more people.
Thank you.
We need more people in the community who are talking about communities that people like me either don't talk about or maybe shouldn't talk about as much. I mean, there are some issues that you guys can talk about with a whole lot more credibility than I can.
So thank you for that. We have to do this again. This was a great conversation, and I appreciate your patience throughout this, because unfortunately technology sometimes doesn't work the way we want it to, but thank you for sticking it out with me. I
Oh,
appreciate
it's
it.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk. Let me know. I'm happy to have you or anyone else from Fred Hampton Left who wants on my show. You know, you've
Perfect.
seen them. Some of my best shows are when we have three or four people anyway. So
Yeah, of course. And this has been a wonderful discussion. Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Please go follow him on YouTube as well as Twitter. And I just want to thank you for your time, sir.
I want to just thank you again for having me, James. I appreciate it.